Let's be real. The emissions goals set in the Act on Climate have been called the most aggressive in our country, and they are. But Rhode Island occupies a tiny fraction of this planet's surface. Even under the most widely accepted climate models, Rhode Island's contribution to global carbon emissions is so minuscule that achieving net zero would have no measurable impact on global temperatures. Sadly, this means that much of our state's green agenda amounts to little more than virtue signaling while simultaneously lowering the standard of living for Rhode Islanders. Let's look at the numbers. In the first quarter of 2015, Rhode Island's average residential electricity rate was about 19.24 cents per kilowatt hour. In the first quarter of 2025, that rate was 32.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a 68% increase in just 10 years. Now compare that to the national average, which increased from 12.65 cents to 16.51 cents in roughly the same period. That's a 31% rise. Rhode Island's rate hikes are more than double the national pace. This isn't abstract. These are real costs being felt by real people, especially our low-income residents, our seniors living on fixed incomes, and the small businesses trying to keep their doors open in a post-pandemic economy. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. The House Minority Caucus has submitted a suite of bills this legislative session to address the rapidly increasing cost of energy in our state, costs that are being driven largely by the misguided Act on Climate of 2021. First, let me be very clear. Republicans are not climate deniers. That term is a political slur crafted by the radical left to shame anyone who questions whether the current policy approach to renewable energy is sound, practical, or affordable. We acknowledge that climate change is occurring. Where we differ is in what we believe is causing it, and more importantly, what solutions are realistic without bankrupting the people of our state. Let's be real. The emissions goals set in the Act on Climate have been called the most aggressive in our country, and they are. But Rhode Island occupies a tiny fraction of this planet's surface. Even under the most widely accepted climate models, Rhode Island's contribution to global carbon emissions is so minuscule that achieving net zero would have no measurable impact on global temperatures. Sadly, this means that much of our state's green agenda amounts to little more than virtue signaling while simultaneously lowering the standard of living for Rhode Islanders. Let's look at the numbers. In the first quarter of 2015, Rhode Island's average residential electricity rate was about 19.24 cents per kilowatt hour. In the first quarter of 2025, that rate was 32.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a 68% increase in just 10 years. Now compare that to the national average, which increased from 12.65 cents to 16.51 cents in roughly the same period. That's a 31% rise. Rhode Island's rate hikes are more than double the national pace. This isn't abstract. These are real costs being felt by real people, especially our low-income residents, our seniors living on fixed incomes, and the small businesses trying to keep their doors open in a post-pandemic economy. Every member of this House has heard these complaints from their constituents. Many talk publicly about the crisis of rising energy costs, but some of them are the same lawmakers that are passing the very mandates and subsidies that are causing the prices to rise. They've even organized protests of the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, blaming them for rate hikes the PUC is legally obligated to pass through under current law. Let me clarify the role of the PUC. The Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission can review, modify, or reject utility rate increases related to delivery charges, capital investments, and state-mandated program fees, like the energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. It can protect ratepayers in just those areas. But when it comes to supply costs, what the utility is paying for the electricity that they sell to us, the PUC's hands are tied. If the utility proves that these costs reflect the actual market prices with no markup, State law requires that the PUC approve them and pass them through. That means your rates go up because of market volatility and legislative mandates, not because of some malicious decision by the utilities or by the commission. And speaking of scapegoats, let's talk about the energy company. Far too often, the utility is painted as the villain, but many of these costs increases stem from legislative mandates, laws passed by the General Assembly that force utilities to buy expensive energy or fund inefficient programs. And the same lawmakers who pass these mandates are the ones publicly attacking the utility for doing what the law compels them to do. While the nationwide profit margin of these types of utility companies averages about 9.3%, Rhode Island's utility company's average profit margin is 4.03%. Greed and profits, as the advocates defending the Act on Climate constantly point to, are clearly not the drivers here. Worse still, these mandates often prevent the utility from making much needed investments in our natural gas infrastructure. Natural gas is one of the cleanest, most efficient, and affordable sources of electricity generation available. States with sound energy policies across this nation have used it to successfully reduce emissions while keeping costs down. But here in Rhode Island, ideological opposition to gas has stalled repairs, blocked upgrades, and driven costs up. A fact recently highlighted by the Providence Journal. That's why the House Minority Caucus has introduced several bills rooted in reality and focused on relief. And some of these bills I will explain right now. House Bill 6201 adds nuclear energy to the definition of alternative energy sources. Nuclear power is clean, highly efficient, and offers reliable baseload energy. This would give the utility more flexibility to purchase lower cost energy and reduce dependency on volatile wind and solar markets. House Bill 5575, passed just this week, offers the state to procure nuclear power and count it towards zero emissions targets. This is a rare moment of bipartisan realism and admission that nuclear power must be part of the solution if we're serious about both emissions and affordability. We need more policies like that. Another one of our bills, House Bill 6202, places a moratorium on the state's net metering program, long-term solar and wind contracts, and heat pump subsidy programs. Right now, solar customers are credited at the full retail rate for energy they produce, up to 125% of their usage. That's not market-based. It's an inflated rate that gets passed on to every single ratepayer in the state. Heat pump subsidies are largely funded through hidden charges, specifically the energy efficiency fee on your electric bill. These programs may benefit a few, but they cost everyone. House Bill 6303 repeals the Renewable Energy Growth Program, which now functions as an instrument of the Act on Climate. This law forces utilities into long-term, high-cost contracts, 15 to 20 years, for wind and solar projects, regardless of their viability. The utility is then allowed to recover any losses by charging the customers on the other end of the bill. House Bill 6104 eliminates the energy efficiency charge, a per kilowatt hour fee that all ratepayers pay, but only a small minority benefit from. This program imposes upfront costs on everyone, despite delivering savings to only a select group. Rather than sending money to wealthy corporations who benefit from these programs, we feel it should remain with the struggling homeowners. Let me be clear. These bills will not solve this crisis overnight, but they represent a practical, achievable steps towards bringing relief to the people of Rhode Island. We already face some of the highest electricity rates, the highest costs of living, and the highest tax burdens in the nation. What we need now is not more ideology, but we need common sense and accountability. The people of Rhode Island are asking for relief. Let's finally deliver it. Thank you. And I'll take questions if there are any.
Leader Chippendale, the moratorium for electricity shutoffs just passed a few weeks ago. And unlike past years where thousands of Rhode Islanders get notices that they were overdue hundreds of dollars, in this case, this year, because of the carnage in the energy market over the last 6 months to a year, they're getting overdue notice in the thousands of dollars, making it virtually impossible for many of them to dig themselves out. And like Damocles' sword, shutoffs are hanging literally over their head. As a temporary measure, given the fact that there is profit in the utility companies, should that moratorium be extended this year until the situation is resolved?
That's outside of the legislative scope of what we're talking about here. But obviously, what you're seeing in what we're all seeing in this demographic is the result of everything I'm talking about. Yes, there have been moratoriums placed on shutoffs because of whatever economic conditions. It's so out of control now, as you point out. We're dealing with thousands and thousands of dollars. Yes, I believe all ratepayers need to have some level of relief. Where the money comes to offset that, I don't know. But what I do know is if we stop compelling the electric company to purchase this much more expensive type of electricity, this renewable energy, then those bills wouldn't be thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's the problem we're trying to tackle here.
What impact do you think this has had on manufacturing in the state?
Tremendous impact. All you have to do is talk to any manufacturer. Most manufacturing facilities use three-phase electricity in their buildings, which consumes a ton of electricity. Their commercial rates are even higher than residential rates. It's no wonder why businesses that are either looking to move into Rhode Island, stay in Rhode Island, or expand in Rhode Island are asking for tax breaks, pilot agreements, and all sorts of things because they just can't afford to operate here under the normal scheme. It's just a reflection of exactly what you're talking about.
I want to talk a bit more about specifically some of the legislation here. One of the things actually I want to talk about was some of your Democratic colleagues are proposing a 4% cap on the profit margins for Rhode Island Energy. What are your thoughts on that? And maybe the argument that this is more about how Rhode Island Energy this is more about Rhode Island Energy's profits than renewable energy.
Yeah, that's an extremely misguided position that my colleagues take. As I pointed out in the speech, the national average for utility companies is over 9%. Our utility is making just over 4%. So to try to attack them as the villain is misguided, and the energy is going in the wrong direction. The political energy is going in the wrong directions. So my colleagues who want to make the corporations the bad guys are misguided. The same lawmakers who are, again, leading these rallies down at PUC and chanting, death to the utility companies are the ones who are passing these very laws which are jacking up the rates. The utility company is not even allowed to invest into their own infrastructure, which they know will make them more efficient in delivering natural gas, which will also impact electric delivery because obviously we're burning a large degree of natural gas in Rhode Island to create our electricity. But they're not allowed to do that because those same legislators have a fear that natural gas is some terrible thing. The reality is, if my colleagues would just stop and speak with our colleagues in other states that have successful energy policies, every single one of those states is fundamentally founded on natural gas power production and nuclear power production. Those are their baselines. They never go off. They're always making electricity. So when there's no sun and there's no wind, they will be able to keep the power on. And these electric companies across the country, again, they're making more than double in a profit margin of what ours is. So that's misguided energy. They're not the villains. The legislature is the villain in this story.
And I also want to talk too, there's the legislative goal, or Rhode Island's goal for 100% renewable energies in 8 years. Do you see that as a reasonable target?
It will never happen. And I'm not a cynic, I'm not a naysayer, I'm a realist. And this has been stated across the country by climate experts who look at the goals of various states, and they know that the technology is in its infancy. When you go to these large consortiums across the country where politicians and policymakers from across the nation get together, this is the message they're trying to drive home to us. The efficiency of whether it's solar panels or any type of renewable energy is exponentially growing. We are not yet at the point where we can invest all of this money into these renewable sources and expect that they're going to solve our problem. They're just not going to. Achieving net zero is not possible. Right now, we're all so used to seeing Teslas and charging stations and windmills and solar panels and everything everywhere. But the reality is that the entire motor vehicle fleet in the United States of America is only 1% electric. And if we, in certain parts of the state, put more of these policies into effect, like electric vehicles and electrification of our homes, which is part of the Act on Climate and part of the EC4 Council, which dictates what policies we have to approach, we already know there are parts of the state that cannot handle the power being requested right now. I represent one of those parts. We had a solar project on the western part of the state that was not allowed to go forward because the infrastructure could not handle any more power coming out of that area. Well, what happens when a couple of folks in that neighborhood decide they're going to try to comply with the Act on Climate. They get 4 electric vehicles, each of them pulling 75 amps to charge each of them, and then electrify their homes. Now everything's electric heat, electric hot water. The same stress is going to be placed on those utility infrastructure. And that utility infrastructure is very costly to upgrade, and that can be passed down to and it will be passed down to the consumer. So all of the tenets of the Act on Climate equal more costs. And we have an ailing infrastructure system. We have a utility company that's not allowed to improve what they do. And we're compelling them to buy some of the most expensive energy in the country, which they have no choice but to pass down to the ratepayers of the state.
Quonset might not be too happy to hear about some cuts to some grants and programs when it comes to solar and wind. Wind is such a big piece of that. I guess, what's your response to them, these companies that have come here for wind projects to add to Rhode Island's grid?
These companies are simply doing what the capitalist markets do. They're reacting to trends, in this case trends created by the federal government and the state governments, who have seen this renewable, whether it's solar or wind, these projects as something we're going to support legislatively. Frankly, the people who are doing the best on that are the people who are having them installed on their property, holding the leases on them, and the developers who build it and then leave. The towns aren't making anything off of it. They're losing green land to it. They're losing open spaces and forested land to it. People's property values are plummeting. And I don't care what anyone in this building tells you. The real estate agents in the state will confirm that property values are taking a hit. Just go to Alpine Estates and ask them what happened when those windmills were erected. It's devastating to our state across the board in every single facet. And while I'm sympathetic that companies are investing in this, they will adjust, they will adapt, they will do something else, or they will serve another state. It's not going to be feasible long term. When the subsidies run out on all of this renewable solar panels and windmills, you're going to see it stop happening. Because unless the government subsidizes it, it's not affordable to do.
We saw the PUC recently mandate that the Rhode Island Energy conduct an audit. Now that was for a fairly specific instance that they were requiring. Now it was an independent audit that they'd have to hire. But what are your thoughts on Rhode Island Energy getting an audit?
Well, I'm a fan of audits. We stood in this room not too many weeks ago and talked about the Inspector General, which essentially is a giant auditor for everything. So I don't have any objection to the sole utility company that feeds our public grid with being subject to audits. In fact, I don't think any business should really fear audits if they're conducting themselves properly. I do know that it's gone from Narragansett Electric to National Grid to Rhode Island Power in a very short amount of time. And so I'm sure there's some stack up of sloppiness across those transitions that may come out in an audit. I'm not sure exactly what the audit will find, but audits are a good way of keeping tab on the people that we use in our business in the state.
The George Wiley Center here in Rhode Island has advocated for a number of years something called PIP, which is a percentage of income payment plan for low-income residents. And what this would do effectively is cap energy bills at 3% of a household's income for electricity and gas, or 6% for electricity if used for heating. Do you see that as a viable option?
No, I see that as simply transferring the extremely high costs onto all the other ratepayers. I think making the problem better for everyone is the solution, Pat. Not more subsidies, not more pain for the people who work every day and who are paying their bills to be subsidizing other things. This is a government-created problem. We created this problem. It's up to us to solve it. It's not up to us to transfer that pain onto someone else.
There have been several attempts at rebates and discounts, or subsidies, if you will, in effect, for electric vehicles in the state. The governor has advocated for several of them. They've become what Buddy Cianci used to say, vaporware. They seem to have disappeared. Are you familiar with the success or failure of that? And as an add-on to that, your remarks about the grid. Significant parts of the state actually can't absorb electric vehicles, can they?
Can or can't?
Can't.
As I said earlier, yes, I represent a part of the state that can't. We're on the end of the line, on the western part of our state, up against Connecticut. Those lines are so burdened right now with just modernity, like just people doing what they do in their own homes. And now if we start adding electric vehicle chargers onto these and electrifying all of our homes, that's just more of a burden onto it. And if we have to deforest more land to put either more windmills up or more solar panels, that's even more that's going to have to go into the infrastructure. Our infrastructure in this nation was pretty much built out in the 50s and 60s. And there has been very little improvement to the grid as a whole, except for Texas, which is its own animal. They have their own grid. It's well overdue, particularly if we think we're going to ever electrify as much of this country as my policymaking colleagues want to do.
And I guess my final question is, there's a great deal of concern about electrifying vehicles. Wouldn't it be more cost effective for people of lower income to make conventional, more modern gas-powered vehicles simply more financially attractive?
Yes, yes. I mean, I myself drive a very old car because I can't afford new cars, and I think that's a reality that we're all facing. But if you look at the electric vehicles, your average electric vehicle right now is 30 to 40% heavier than its internal combustion engine counterpart. That's more road damage, that's more microplastics into the environment from their braking and from their tire wear. They are doing the opposite of what they've been put out there to solve. They are hurting the environment rather than helping the environment. The occurrence of fires that we've seen, whether they're home fires, whether they're the car fires, there's all sorts of problems. It's an industry in its infancy, and without all those subsidies that you mentioned, we wouldn't see this much investment by consumers into these electric vehicles.
Are you guys willing to take off subject
I want to
questions?
make sure that we give
We're good.
our friends at 12 all the. Okay.
Yeah, if we could scoot out, that would be great.
You absolutely, yes.
Because I gotta get
No,
ready
that-
for mine.
Did anyone else
Yeah, anybody have anything to add?
add to?
Just wanted just some general.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just wanted some general thoughts on the budget. It's hammer time.
Yeah.
A lot of consternation about the loss of shelter beds, actually a significant net decrease. Some are postulating as high as 50% decrease in an era when some would argue we need more shelter beds. How does that speak to the governor's priorities, and what are your thoughts on the budget at large?
Well, I mean, I can only talk to the governor's proposed budget because I haven't seen the House budget. I know that the House budget is going to be very different. You know that the House budget is going to be very different. You've been around long enough. Where those differences or what those differences will look like, we don't know yet. So it's going to be hard for me to comment on what we're going to be voting on in a few weeks because I suspect it's going to be dramatically different. The governor's priorities and shelter beds, as you framed that question, I can't tell you what the governor's priorities are, why the governor's priorities are the way that they are. I can tell you, as we are all painfully aware, that homelessness is at a rate we haven't ever seen, or certainly haven't seen in a very long time. Housing affordability is contributing to that, but it's not the only driver. We know that there are people who have come to Rhode Island because we're very gracious and generous with our public assistance. There's no waiting period. There's no work off welfare system. It's once you're on, you're on. It's a family lifestyle that gets passed from generation to generation. And this is clearly exacerbating the problem. We are a magnet for folks. It's evidenced by our 30 to 34% Medicaid eligible population in this state. When you have a third of your state essentially federally declared poor, you are in a bad position. So we can we should either stop taxing the hell out of them, lower the cost of living, create an economic environment that offers them opportunity to actually make money that will allow them to afford to buy a house, pay their college loans, keep the heat on, pay their electric bill, and maybe one day get an electric vehicle. But we don't. We just had a debate the other day on the floor where we allowed the city of Providence, our capital city, the most populous city in the state, to increase over our statutory rate of 4% by double that. It will hurt the lowest income folks in the city. It's the east side will take it with stride. They'll roll right over and they'll be fine with it. The people in Oneyville, the people in Mandan, the people in Washington Park, the people on the south side are going to get hammered. And we sit up here and we point our finger at the utility company as if they're doing something wrong. It's the hypocrisy of this building and the supermajority that has created and allows and feeds this hypocrisy.
promise one last question.
Miami.
It's on everyone's mind, the assault weapon ban.
Yeah.
Anything you can, I understand there's a lot of negotiations going on, a lot of sentence diagramming and languaging and from your perspective, is there a chance this will be beaten back, or what can you say publicly?
I can only speak as far as the House, obviously. I don't know the inner workings right now in the Senate, and I'm not a gambling man, but if I were, I would say it's absolutely going to pass in the House. What version of it, I don't know. I haven't seen the most recent version of it because I refuse to be a part of it. I refuse to participate in the folly of trying to amend a bill that has clearly already been deemed unconstitutional by courts and will be once again deemed unconstitutional, hopefully as early as this fall, if not sooner, by the ultimate court, which is the Supreme Court of the United States.
Fair enough. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right.
Thank you.